how did you find out about our history as women in football, and how did that inspire you to being a feminist on football?
Well, thanks very much, Lulu. So some people here might know this story, but I'm going to repeat it anyway. Charlie, my husband, as most of you will know, helped mutualise Lewes FC back in 2010, and I became an owner of the football club then. But I never liked football. I didn't want to go to a match. I just thought it was a good thing to do. And then in 2016, when he said to me, "What would you say if we were going to pay the women the same as the men?" I said I didn't even know women play football. So then that's when I started to find out why I didn't know that women play football. I started to find out about the history of women's football in this country and in many of our major footballing countries around the world, that women were banned from playing football. And actually at a time when it was more popular than men's football, which explained a lot about the crowds that now we were getting then anyway at women's football, which were very low. Yeah, I guess I found out about it when Lewes made international headlines, and I realised that I didn't know that women played football. That's how I found out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you say in the book that you then went to a women's match. And how did that make you feel to go and see women actually playing football?
Yeah, so I went along. I mean, I think there's maybe a couple of our female footballers here tonight, so I hope they don't get embarrassed. But I went along to a women's football match in Dripping, and it wasn't like I thought a football match would be. So I thought there would be hooligans and lots of men drinking beer and shouting, and I thought that I would feel unsafe. I went on my own as a woman, and I didn't. There were really nice people just sort of drinking cups of tea, maybe having beer, and seeming to get on very well. And I felt completely safe. But the amazing thing was when I saw the women playing football, because I didn't know the rules of the game, but I could see these young women on the pitch being really strong and powerful and shouting at each other, working as a team and being incredible warriors, really. And I had never seen women publicly behaving like that. And it's kind of embarrassing, but it's true. Normally in public, women are, I thought, more decorative, we're taught to be smaller, we're taught not to shout, and so I was very inspired by this, and I thought it was the antidote to all the sexist nonsense that I was seeing, in other public places like Instagram. So I kind of had an epiphany at my first women's football match, and I felt better in myself because they were women, and I didn't understand that feeling, but I did. And I wanted my daughter, who's here tonight, and her friends, who are also here tonight, and more women to know about this, because I realised that the reason these women players weren't getting big crowds was because people didn't know that they were playing. Everyone thought it was men's football that they would go to. So that's when I started to make lists of women's groups and go and tell them to come and watch Lewes FC Women, even if, and in fact especially if, they didn't like football. Because I knew that then people couldn't criticise what Lewes FC were doing if we could raise the crowd figure. They couldn't say the women don't deserve to be paid the same as the men because they don't get the same crowds, because we would have these crowds. So I felt very angry about the ban, angry that there were critics of equality, and determined to get more women like me that didn't like football.
And you achieved that, definitely.
You were one of them.
I was, absolutely. And I think something you write in here as well is feeling that emotion with women playing football. And no offence to any of the men here, when men cry when they win the football, I used to find that a bit bizarre. But when we won the Euros, the England women's team in 2022, I felt that, because it was that power and strength and empowerment for us as women, which is something that we'd previously been excluded from from that space. And it's really about, and I know for you it's really important, that football represents a cultural shift across way more than just football and sport. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, you know, so as a bit of a feminist, I really feel that the people that need to change for us to change our culture are actually men and boys. Much as I love men and boys, you know, they're brilliant. But if we're to change the way that the gender power thing is going on in our society, we need men and boys to make space and sit down and be quiet and things like that. Right? So I thought that the best way to talk to men about this was football, because it has such a grip over so many men's hearts and minds. So if we could do things in football that would change the kind of imbalance in our culture, then we'd be talking to the people that needed to hear it, you know? Because so many times I'd be with my sort of women friends or talk to women's groups, and they're all like suffering, and they're kind of sympathising with each other, and it's all very well to hug each other and gather, and I think there's a benefit to that. But how are we changing anything? So I thought, football, okay then, let's do it through football.
Yeah, amazing. And what have some of your highlights been of that, and what have some of the huge challenges been?
Oh my goodness. So I've had loads of highlights. First I should say thank you to Lewes FC, you know, because if Charlie and Ed and the other directors on the board hadn't decided to pioneer equal pay in football and close the gender pay gap in football in 2017, I would never have got involved. And actually, I have got so much personally from this, and sometimes it's been a struggle. You know, so one of my highlights is probably, you know, the crazy suffragette flash mob, where we, some suffragettes here, where we kind of like, is that Ginny? I don't know. Yes. Where Ginny choreographed, you know, us to dance to Sisters Are Doing It for Themselves outside W.O. Smith in the precinct in Lewes. And then we marched to the dripping pan with banners saying "Deeds Not Words," and you know, made the front page of the Sussex Express. You know, we were really famous. And we had such a laugh doing it. I mean, that was weeks of rehearsals inside a church hall. So that, you know, that had to be a highlight. And then also some of the challenges is more like, I don't know, trying to get people to know what they don't know and want to know what they don't know. It's very difficult, because when you hold a certain privilege, and let's call it male football privilege, why should you let it go? You know, why should you? You're doing very well out of it. And why would you want to know more about other people's experience when it doesn't affect you? So the kind of challenges were really explaining, really many times over and over again, why certain things were really, really important, like media and you know, mad events and activations like women's football chanting workshops, or the offside rule and all that jazz evenings, where we would explain to people new to football what the rules were without judgment, so no question too silly. You know, you can ask about the players' periods if you want. You can ask about why someone's kicking the ball from the corner if you want. And, you know, we'll reply. And these things are super, super important. Maybe even as important, you know, as talking about who the next coach is, I would say. But it's very hard for some people to understand that. Which I also understand why it's hard to understand, you see. So yeah, the challenges in, I think, in pushing against the prevailing culture nicely. You know, so no one is left behind, no one's too upset, everyone's still getting along.
And you openly say you're an imposter in football, not only by being a woman, but being a woman who didn't like football. And how's that played as an advantage?
Well, so at first I didn't like football, but then I got to like football. But I was a woman who didn't know the rules of football, or know anything about the rules of the culture of football either. So it was an advantage because I saw things through fresh eyes, if you like. So I came from a background in fashion and then therapy, where, you know, people had a lot of interpersonal skills, and, you know, and people, you know, were air kissing all over the shop, and they were kind of, I don't know, very open to new ways of doing things. And I found football to be sort of the opposite of that in many ways, which is fine, except if you want a new market of people that aren't used to that behaviour, then you need to maybe change things up a bit, bring different things into the ground, put different communications out, think about different sponsors, you know, market differently. So, yeah, I think it was an advantage. I felt it was an advantage. And it was lucky that I was kind of menopausal, really, because I think pre-menopausal I would have been a bit scared about that and thought, you know, maybe I'm a bit weird and I should just go along with it. But I was quite angry during my menopause.
And for fuel.
Yeah, so it was fuel. It all kind of, the universe was talking, it all kind of coincided. My menopause, being angry, getting on a football club board like who would have thunk it, and you know, having these ideas about what to do.
Yeah, amazing. And we've seen, you know, with women's football has grown hugely since your journey, and this book is so perfectly timed with our win on Sunday and that achievement abroad. What are some of the dangers, however, of women's football growing so quickly, and the things that we all need to be aware of as a different culture? I know you explain it as a being a different culture.
It's quite a big question, that, Lulu.
Sorry.
It's all right. It's all right. I hope you're all interested in women's football. So, a friend that's played internationally for New Zealand and also played for Lewes, Katie Rood, she said recently, they're trying to make us fly before we've even grown our feathers. And I thought this was a really good way of speaking about women's football, because basically at Lewes FC we're different. We lead with our women. So most of the sponsorship we get comes through the women. Most of the grants we get comes through the women. So that's a really unusual situation. In most football clubs, the men are leading and they're passing money across the table to the women. They're sharing some of their resource, if they want to, if they can, with the women. So the women are second, and or third even, after the under-18s boys in some cases. So I think what is really important for women's football is that it gets to sustain itself, that it doesn't rely on handouts from the men's side of a club. Otherwise, the minute something goes wrong with the men's side, the women are shafted, whether it's out of the changing rooms, out of the canteen, they don't get to play on the same pitch anymore. Whatever it is, they are vulnerable and fragile. The whole system is fragile. So it would be much better if we didn't have handouts from big Premier League men's sides to their women's sides, and that we just thought of ways, creative ways of getting sponsorship for the women, of making sure that they're well looked after in terms of medical care, because this is so important with all the ACL problems that you get with women, often because they're wearing boots designed for men and playing on pitches designed for men, and they're not being trained according to their menstrual cycle and things like this that are particular to women. So I think we need to look at the women's game in and of itself and develop it that way. I don't know if that will happen, but I think it's worth bearing in mind, and we can certainly do some things that will help it develop that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, amazing, thank you. And as a final question before we open to the audience and any questions that they have, what's been the biggest change in you throughout, sorry, it's another big question, throughout your journey in football and finding yourself here, being a voice for women in football, and now having this book that can, you know, go far and wide? What's been the biggest change in you?
You know, it still feels weird for me to be speaking about football all the time, but I just am. So I think the biggest change for me has been probably in the amount of public speaking I do, really, and kind of media work, which I didn't used to do before. But I think when when you're on a bit of a mission and you have something that you want to change, it becomes much easier. So yeah, I think that's probably the biggest.
And I love one of your tips in the book is to not make tea at board meetings, because you might miss out on the important conversation that's happening, to undo that conditioning that on this book is about so much more than football. It is about culture, and our right to power and spaces as women. So there are more for sale at the back, and you're going to be signing just through the entrance, I think, as well, aren't you? So thank you so much, and yeah, an honour to be here with you.